Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat, looking at the balance changes that are going to be coming in the Scarlet Bison 2.2.0 update. My name is John from the Company of Heroes 3 team, and I'm joined by, of course, special guests, Jason and Darren. How are you both doing today?
Yeah, doing pretty well, John.
Okay. So, as a reminder, the Scarlet Bison 2.2 update is going to be releasing on Thursday, November 27th. And that, of course, is the same day that the Endure and Defy Battle Group DLC pack is also going to be available to get on Steam. So, you're not going to want to miss that. So, before we kind of hop into things, Jason, Darren, how you feeling about this update? You in a good mood? I imagine that players are going to be pretty excited about some of the stuff that you're working on.
Yeah, a lot of talk, lot to talk about because we have a bunch of changes coming down the pipeline that we've just been working on for
Wow.
a very long time now.
Yeah. Yeah, very excited to see I'm definitely excited to see how the battle groups do with everyone. There's a lot of cool toys there, and obviously the community will learn how to use them way faster than we will. Um, so hopefully that'll be a lot of fun. But also there's quite a few balance changes that we've been working on for a decent amount of time now. So pretty excited to unveil some of them.
Okay. Excellent. So before we jump in, or I guess we can just hop right in. But for those that have been with us since the beginning, we're throwing it back to some of our old balance streams of the past. And I think everyone knows what that means. It's time for some slides.
We couldn't get you pictures, so this is what we give you.
All right. So I guess we can just get going here. Everyone loves a good slide presentation. So, Jason, let's start with mainline infantry
Yeah.
changes.
And just as like a disclaimer as we start here, this will be a subset of all of the changes that are in. Uh, we are going to highlight some of the big changes I think a lot of people will care about,
Mm.
but by no means is this exhaustive. The patch notes will be going out proper Thursday morning.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Thursday
Yeah.
morning on the 27th. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely stay tuned for that. There's going to be a lot of more minor adjustments to a lot of different things, but again, we wanted to call out some of the big changes that you could look forward to.
Okay. So it looks like we're starting with zero CP infantry call in. I know this has been a very spicy point of conversation in the
Yes.
community.
So,
Yeah. So if you roll it, this is gonna be a little scuffed, but like for zero CP infantry, we are now setting them all on a 25-second cooldown before they can be deployed. This doesn't apply to the two paradrop units, the Pioneers and the machine gun. So this will affect things like the Australians, the Bersaglieri, and other units as well. Uh, this will be kind of in line with a bunch of at the top there are mainline infantry changes where we are adjusting the mainline kind of access or the balance of those units of the early phase. So there's quite a few changes in mind, not just these. But yeah, so this is kind of intended to reduce the increased tempo that some of these zero CP units give you.
mhm.
Um, we want to like the kind of the goal with all of these mainline changes is to restore a little bit more tactical gameplay in like who wins the early game. There's some of these factors like the Cullens are a little too impactful in terms of who is able to take early map control or win early engagements, and we want to roll these back slightly so that the way you micro, the way you use cover and movement matters significantly more.
Okay.
And also we've, for the most part, this is already the case, but we've standardized a lot of Cullens that were falling out of the mark where all of their Cullen recharges are going to be standardized to 120 seconds.
Okay. Anything else to cover here, or should we just move on?
Move on.
I think we're ready to move on.
Ooh,
All right.
rifle. I know a lot of people have been calling for rifleman changes. So what's
So,
in store here?
all right. So we've noticed that. Well, do you want to bring all the changes up?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that for you.
Just we are giving a significant change to riflemen. Like, it is considered mainly a buff to them. We are finding that riflemen just don't really play the positional game really well. They always either have to close with their enemy to be effective or essentially be ineffective. This was especially prominent. You would especially notice this in team games where you're forced to fight in a lane, so your riflemen would have less room to flank and you'll be forced to fight your enemy head on. And it also meant like riflemen were not really great at punishing people who left cover in the early game. game. So we have given them like significant buffs to their mid and long range performance, both base and their upgraded forms. So riflemen will now want to play more positionally rather than their first game plan for every matchup being to charge forth and try to win the engagement point blank, because
Hmm.
that was their only effective range for the most part.
Yeah. And like to those alongside these changes, and we'll get to them after. There are going to be some damage increases for Axis infantry as well. So essentially, the intent is to make it so that being out of cover or being out of position is just in general a little bit more dangerous to most units. The riflemen will be significantly more threatening to units early on at that long distance. It's pretty easy to ignore the damage right now. Now they're still going to be mostly spec'd into that close range damage. That's where they're going to generate the biggest advantage over all of the other infantry units. But now putting them in good cover, punishing enemies out of position will be significantly better with riflemen, even if they're not at point blank range.
Okay.
I guess I could add one more point to that.
Yep.
The changes to the lethality should also help them a little bit against the DAC. They'll have a little bit more firepower against those ultra early lights
Mhm.
as part of that build for riflemen.
Okay. Up next, combined arms.
Yes. So as part of our mainline infantry changes, DAC combined arms is being changed quite a bit. So rather than giving both the received accuracy and the accuracy bonus that it gave to infantry, it is now going to give primarily the speed bonus and ability recharge. And we've moved the offensive stats for the most part to the base units themselves. So all of the DAC infantry units will be more accurate out of the gates. They'll be more effective against enemy units. However, they will no longer get that bonus with combined arms, and they will no longer. They did not get the defensive stats rolled into it. So it kind of works out to be
Mhm.
their overall power should be roughly the same, but they should be significantly easier to use without using the combined arms
Mhm.
ability.
It allows DAC to essentially take more engagements individually without needing to essentially always group up to be effective.
Hmm.
But it also makes, like a large horde of DAC just coming your way easier to fight off because they lack that defensive bonus now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the assault grenadiers also received some big changes. The base stats on the unit were raised, and the veterancy requirement or the veterancy scaling for the unit has been significantly increased. So at Vet 3, rather than getting ability recharge, they now get 25% more damage, which is very significant. This affects their grenades. This affects their guns. But in exchange, their early power has been reduced quite a bit. They no longer get assault disembark right out of the gates. However, we have improved it where now the vehicle no longer needs to be in combat to trigger the ability, which I've noticed a lot of players sometimes can't really notice. So it will be easier to use. However, it will now require veterancy 1. Kind of the main thought behind this change was the early assault grenadier timing could very easily defeat large amounts of enemy basic infantry. So, for example, one of these pairs of units with really good micro could beat back basically any number of riflemen when microed correctly,
Right.
which was defeating the point of what we wanted. So we've instead made the scaling much better, but also reduced some of that early game power.
Okay. Wehrmacht barracks.
All right. Yep, so for the Grenadier, we're giving them a slight long range damage increase, so this will allow them to better chip away at units at distance, both in cover wars, but also for those who are approaching them. So they'll be able to do a little bit more damage onto their enemies to help protect units like the MG42, which is core to their army. The big change, however, we have done is we have now given them their grenade by default. So they do have an interesting way to now, in the early game, push people out of cover for the MG42 or have access to essentially a defensive grenade if damage people who are charging into them. They're still not going to like scale that well into the mid to late game. You're still going to need advanced infantry in the form of the Panzer Grenadier, Jaeger, and Stoßtruppen to carry Wehrmacht's infantry game, but this should help make the early game for Wehrmacht a lot less volatile, because that was the thing that we were noticing is Wehrmacht is pretty weak in that 0 to 5 minute mark of the game.
Yeah,
Okay.
we wanted to make it so that, again, similar to the rifleman changes, if your opponent is out of position in that long range, it's a little bit less forgiving than it was before. So again, grenadiers will be able to do more damage to units at maximum range. You can also use grenades to punish anyone who's just kind of sprinting at you, but obviously they can still dodge them. And then this just makes the grenadiers overall more effective at defending the MG42, which will be noticeable.
Okay. So it sounds like the Grenadiers are back.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about changes to transfer
Yes,
orders.
the transfer. So the big change we're just doing to transfer orders, and it's is to just allow the experience for grenadiers to now transfer into the unit that you are transferring to. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes it more rewarding for for Wehrmacht to if you really need that power spike to transfer that veteran grenadier for a veteran infantry unit, or if you're just getting more and more into the late game and you're finding like I really only need one grenadier, and I don't really need the veteran unit and you need to like replace a veteran unit because due to losses throughout the game, you can transfer that grenadier to still get the veteran versions of
Yeah.
the unit. Though do note it still comes with a pretty high premium, so it's not something you'll always be doing because you are paying a higher cost for the unit overall.
Yeah. But the other advantage of this is you can get kind of accelerated timings. If you do very well with your grenadiers and get ahead of the curve in veterancy, you can then translate that to a higher than normal veterancy advanced infantry unit, which then can get more wins and you can kind of snowball it a bit. Don't underestimate the power of like kind of the first unit you can convert if you do well with it. The other thing to note is that this transfers the raw amount of EXP.
Mhm.
So you might not necessarily stay at the same vet level. So for example, the veterancy requirements of the advanced infantry is higher than the grenadier by a decent amount. So a vet 1 grenadier might not necessarily translate to a vet 1 panzer grenadier. However, it's close enough where generally they'll be the same, but you'll keep that raw amount. And that also means if you were slightly over the veterancy requirement, so like you were halfway to vet 2, all of that EXP gets transferred over. It doesn't get wasted.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
And the actual UI for the transfer orders, that's changed as well, right?
Yeah, that was moved to the faction panel. So the buttons on the top left of or middle left of the screen above the minimap,
Mhm.
it has been moved to that position.
Yeah, I think people might have caught a glimpse of that in one of the shoutcasts that we did. So
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that when we make these changes on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Vehicles.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears, if you'll allow me, to generalist heavy tanks.
Right, so yeah, for the heavy tanks, we didn't want to exactly remove them as a call-in from the game, but we have done significant changes to the generalist to reduce the effectiveness of stalling strategies, essentially. So the big one you'll notice for all the heavies is they're getting a considerable price increase on both their manpower and fuel costs for the generalist. So your Tiger, your Pershing, Black Prince, King Tiger, not the DAC Tiger, because that still has its own tech requirements as part of that unit. But for all those battle group heavy tanks, they are getting a substantial cost increase. But you can reduce that price by getting tech, essentially. When you get the final tech building for your respective faction, you reduce the cost of these call-ins by 20%, so still a little bit more than it was before, but it...
Roll the
Well,
slide.
yeah. Do we have the rest of the points on the slide?
Yeah.
Yep,
So yeah,
fuel costs.
so both manpower and fuel increased,
Yep,
and also a
so-
CP cost increase. But before people panic, like we nerfed these out of orbit.
Mhm.
On the next slide,
Yep.
I realized we set this up a little bit awkwardly. But if you roll to the next slide, the kind of the secondary change that accompanies this is endgame structures will now reduce the cost of heavy tanks, and we've increased, and this is for all, regardless if you have heavy
Yep.
tanks or not, you'll get 2 command points on top of what you normally get, which is around 1 command point. So we've kind of nerfed the ability to rush to a heavy tank or stall into one, whereas if you went straight through the tech path, it is slightly more expensive than it was before.
But it'll arrive
But
sooner.
yeah, it'll arrive sooner.
And this should help for the heavy tanks in particular. They kind of suffer from an issue. They're really good in 1v1, but
Yes.
you almost never see them in team games just because they arrive so late into the battlefield.
Yeah.
Also, this should at least help heavies arrive sooner if you're going the standard tech path.
Yeah, so essentially, we're trying to even the scales a bit. Stalling tactics in 1v1 in particular are really strong because players generally earn CPs faster, and also the impact of a heavy tank is much greater. Whereas in team games, the impact is both lower, it's also harder to get to by raw timing, but also with the plethora of like off-map strikes and the concentration of armor and anti-tank assets, it is generally easier to remove these vehicles as well. So we wanted to kind of even it out without completely removing stalling from the game either. So that's kind of the path we've chosen with these changes. These are obviously a new way of kind of doing call-ins that we haven't really done before in the past. So we are going to be keeping an eye on how these ones do and how the community receives them.
Okay. I saw a question in the chat. Someone was asking if the fuel penalty for the King Tiger still applies.
Yes, the
Yes.
King Tiger still has its
Okay.
field penalty as part of
Yep.
its base package, just due to its stat line.
Okay. What about medium tanks?
Yeah.
Right, the medium tank veterancy. As you will see here, here's the old veterancy, and we have a new one. We are finding medium tank veterancy to one. It was fairly weak overall. The bonuses you got from it were pretty bad, and they didn't actually help you for the most part in armor to armor fighting. What they really did was just make tanks really good at killing infantry, but not good at actually engaging other vehicles, and that kind of created a dynamic where, or especially if you're getting lots and lots of medium tanks over the course of the game, you were really good at just wiping out infantry, which we kind of want to tone back overall. Oh, but we also want to improve the performance, of a medium tank. For one, you will feel there's a performance increase as you're leveling up, but also particularly against their other main targets, which are other vehicles, you're also gonna notice the increase in power, both in accuracy and the ability to both engage the front of other
Yeah.
heavier vehicles. Thanks to now we have given you weapon penetration as part
Yeah.
of Vet 2.
Overall, people should expect that veterancy on medium vehicles should feel more impactful. But we do primarily in vehicle to vehicle combat, it'll be very noticeable. We didn't like how the difference between like a Vet 0 and a Vet 3 Sherman when fighting armor, as a good example. If you look on the stats on the left, for the most part, those aided it in damaging vehicles, or sorry, infantry. And one of the things that we were trying to do with a lot of these vehicle changes is to give a little bit more breathing room for infantry or just non-vehicles in general, particularly in team games. In team games, it's very easy to essentially have so much armor where infantry becomes less important to winning the game, which we don't want to see happen.
All right. AT performance.
Yeah, and this is kind of a segue into this point. So we are improving some of the AT elements in the game in general. So Crew Shock, which is essentially the debuff applied by anti-tank grenades, is being buffed. So now the duration is about 50% longer, from 5 to 7.5 seconds, and also it will lower the unit's rate of fire by 1/3. The intent of this is we've seen, especially in 1v1, but also in team games as well, where players have gotten very good at essentially knowing when it is fine to just drive a vehicle into an infantry unit, even if they have anti-tank weapons, and essentially just outracing them, then kicking them off the field into a retreat and doing a bunch of damage, and then repairing. And we wanted to make this less impactful or less powerful and make you respect snares a little bit more than you did before, by making it so that if you did that, A, you would be vulnerable for a longer period of time, but B, you would be less effective in dealing damage. You would be better off being further away from these units, giving these units more breathing room.
Nothing but respect for
Yep.
my snares.
Yes,
Yep.
pretty much.
And this goes with our other change. The Crew Shock change will also help you to protect your anti-tank guns, which we also want to be a bit more prominent in the anti-tank defense for infantry. So it's a bit of a mixed change. We are increasing the crew size of the anti-tank guns because we found that AoE weapons were just too effective at clearing them and killing the entire crew. So we're giving you one extra model to essentially have against area of effect attacks X, but we are reducing the health of anti-tank guns and removing the cover the gun provides to infantry themselves. So when anti-tank guns are pushed by their counter, which is infantry, they're going to be much easier to decrew, because previously you could push a bunch of infantry into anti-tank guns and they would still manage to get away because they just had a bit too much durability against small arms fire.
Yeah, and to clarify, so the crew went from 4 to 5, which seems like a durability increase, but against small arms, we've reduced both the health and the cover bonus. So the cover bonus used to be around was light cover, so it's around 50% accuracy. So the effective health of the squad has actually gone down against small arms, but also primarily the individual guys manning the gun are going to be more vulnerable to small arms as well. So even though the durability of the squad to things like artillery, off maps, and explosive weapons like tank guns has gone up quite a bit with the extra model not being in kind of the puddle of guys, they are more vulnerable to small arms than they were pre-patch.
Okay. There was another question in the chat about the heavy weapons battle group. I'm assuming it'll still give you one more model.
Yep.
Yes.
You'll still
Weapon
get
teams, yeah.
So you can get 6-man AT guns.
Yep, that's a core aspect of the heavy weapons battle
Yep.
group.
Okay, excellent. All right, let's get into some specific vehicle changes.
So the American vehicle park has changed quite a bit. Kind of the precursor to these changes is the armored battle group received some major changes. But because the way those changes work, which we will get to after, we have more room to increase the power of a lot of the American vehicles. So we'll show that off later.
Yep.
But kind of for the 4x4 truck, you want to go over it?
Yeah, for 4x4 truck, now that armored's being changed, we can give it finally a performance increase, so it will be it will live a little bit longer and be more effective against those ultralights in the early game in particular. So the US barracks play will now just in general be more effective against DAC play. But like the 4x4 won't be able to take on a 250, but it'll be able to provide very valuable fire support against both the 250 and the bike now. Oh, and increased health will allow it to get away. And we actually found that it was a little bit too good with those changes, so it did get a minor cost increase.
Yeah.
We also did a change to the self-repair abilities for both the bike and the 4x4, where they now just end the moment combat occurs, so
Right.
you can't use advanced repair anymore to essentially absorb a lot of fire, but you also will no longer get trapped in the basic self-repair ability if somebody catches you in combat.
Okay. Next up, the Greyhound.
And the important context for those changes, again, we'll get to them, but you will no longer be able to get Vet 1 Jeep immediately out of the gate. That's kind of why we have room to give these extra stats to the unit. But we'll show off how the armored battle grip has been changed, why that is the case later. So the next change is the M8. I forget which patch. A few patches ago,
We nerfed its air effective cannon, and essentially we're giving it back.
we've noticed that the Greyhound has suffered quite a lot over the last patch or so. It's fairly ineffective in all modes. So we've given it more ability to nuke infantry from long range.
Okay.
Or in all ranges, really.
All right.
The Chaffee got some big changes.
Yeah, so the Chaffee, first, the big one is now the Chaffee has a support role as part of the U.S. Army that you would actually want to go back and buy the unit is you can essentially upgrade your Chaffee to have a recon mode ability that gives the tank greatly increased vision and gives you essentially an armored spotter, or that very few factions will have on the battlefield. Well, and in general, we have, with the armored company changes or battle group changes, we are able to give the Chaffee also just more power in general, in the form of both mobility and firepower. The Chaffee has pretty much fallen off when it's not playing with the armored battle group because, one, it's now much more expensive than it used to be. The targets that it generally fights against have generally gotten stronger over time, and just the Chaffee itself, there's more ways to counter the Chaffee in general.
Yeah, like one context to remember is the Grenadier snare. Like all the snares have improved with this patch, as well as things like AT guns. So these stats kind of compensate for some of these.
And the recon mode should also help the Chaffee synergize very well with the mortar pool as you get anti-tank guns from that tier as well.
Yeah, you can use it to spot your AT guns.
Okay.
And-
76 mil conversion.
So kind of in the same vein as a lot of the other changes, we noticed that, again, medium armor was just too effective at removing infantry. So we've changed this upgrade to reduce the cost, but now it no longer gives a very sizable anti-infantry performance. So it's not a decrease. So it's still the same as the regular Sherman gun. However, it'll be, again, better against vehicles, but it loses that improvement versus infantry.
This should also create a bit more diversity in the U.S. tank depot. No longer can you just spam a bunch of standard Shermans to counter all threats. It's still more ideal to get, get the dozer for very specialist anti-infantry or bring out the Hellcat to deal with tanks, where before you could just make a bunch of standard Shermans and counter most threats on the battlefield.
Yeah.
All right. And now we're going to talk about
Yes,
the
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 big
armory. Yes. So alongside the combined arms changes, DAC has received another major set of changes, which is the Africa Armory. Sorry. The biggest change is now each row, so each tier is now an exclusive choice. So of the 3 upgrades per row, you can only get 1 per game. Getting 1 will lock out the other 2. And this is very important. And we've also adjusted the costs of this. It is no longer going to be a manpower only upgrade system. Now, the first tier will remain its current cost. However, tier 2 and tier 3 will have pretty significant increases in fuel cost, while reductions in manpower cost. As the DAC economy has been a little bit lopsided with kind of how it worked before. And we also want to promote generally a little bit more infantry play than it did in the past.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's get into some of those upgrades and some of the
So
specifics.
level 1 upgrades are primarily the same as before. We just added a new upgrade. But the first one we'll go over them is advanced repairs. We significantly increased it from its repair bonus. So if you do go advanced repairs now, you essentially just outright get the best repairs on the game on all your infantry. So even your Panzer Grenadier is better than other people's engineers for the repair duty.
Mhm.
Combat half tracks has mainly remained the same
Yes.
for the most part. You'll see the armor bonus has been increased, though this is more due to changes on the base 250 unit that
Yeah. I don't think we have
we'll
any
be getting
slides.
for this one. And we've also added another upgrade to the tier 1, which allows you to spec a bit more into infantry in the early game as deck. Now you can get at the 6-man, which we've separated from veteran squad leaders as a first tier pick if you
Yeah.
want to play more infantry heavy at the start of the game.
Okay. Let's get into the level 2 ones.
And then for tier 2, we have emergency repair kits, so we've rebundled a lot of the later tier upgrades. So this one gives a small amount of health, but now gives the self repair very early on. The self repair is unchanged; it's still out of combat and stationary repair, but now you can get it as a tier 2 upgrade. The next upgrade is the smoke package, which gives you, rather than giving you health that which it gave before, it's now speed and rotation. So it's much more of a hit and run upgrade than it was before, a survivability package. So now we've kind of reshuffled. If you want to make your vehicles more durable, is in the mid game, you now have 2 meaningful options compared to before. We've noticed in the past, everyone basically always got the smoke upgrade. For increased durability, it was kind of a no-brainer. Now we want to make it so that you have 2 different choices. One gives you more endurance and more immediate health. The other one gives you the smoke, which is very valuable, and the ability to use that smoke with mobility. And the veteran squad leaders, for the most part, is unchanged, but we've separated out the +1 man for Panzergrenz. However, the big change is that it now applies to all infantry.
Okay.
So now Panzergrenz can benefit from both the experience and the damage reduction that VSL gives. So the overall Panzer Grenadier, if you stack both upgrades, will be better than it was before.
Okay. Cool.
I will just mention, you'll notice that these upgrades seem pretty strong overall, but because they're now an exclusive choice, they can have this sort of power like per
Yeah.
tier now, because you're never going to have all these upgrades over the course of the game, which you could have prior
Yes.
as the Deutsche Afrika Corps.
Yeah. So the kind of the rationale with this is we wanted to bring in a little bit the value of the armory for smaller game modes versus larger game modes, and also games that are short and long. The idea is the individual upgrades are more meaningful on average than they were before, and they're very cost efficient and really nice to get. That choice matters quite a bit. However, unlike before, you can no longer build like an Exodia of like all of the upgrades all together and reach a point where your opponent just can't keep up with your cost efficiency.
Mhm.
So essentially, in the early mid game, the armory should matter quite a bit more than it did before. However, towards the late game, the ability for the armory to take over the game will be significantly less. That's
Okay.
kind of the intent.
Mhm.
All right. Do you want to cover level 3?
Yep.
Yep, I can cover level 3 for. So first upgrade we have is the survival package. It's a essentially bundling of the capture and the third health upgrade DAC or second health upgrade DAC have. So this is the utter 80 health bonus, and it allows your vehicles to capture. So all stuff that you could do before, but obviously it's a survival build. The upgrade in the final tier, or if you want that one. And advanced optics, so we've changed this upgrade quite a bit. So not just giving vision while stationary, you get the vision all the time, but we also you increase your weapon accuracy and weapon scatter, which is pretty strong. So, and this is primarily an anti-infantry upgrade, as it increases both the accuracy of your machine guns, the main gun, and the weapon scatter for hitting infantry. So
Mhm.
it does become a very powerful anti-infantry upgrade in the end game. And then tungsten rounds, which we've also given a significant buff, will now also just outright give all vehicles plus 25 anti-vehicle damage. Now that it is in this end tier pick, where before it was kind of hard to both justify as a second tier pick, and it couldn't have that much power being that early. We can now just give tungsten the ability to essentially get some of the best anti-tank in the game, but obviously you're not getting the health bonus or the sight and accuracy.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a lot of very strong opinions in the chat about some of these changes,
Mhm.
but I guess my question is have we made significant or at least some changes to some of the DAX units to sort of compensate for some of these changes, or to sort of keep some of these changes in mind? Like, what is that sort of synergy between changes to the core roster and some of the battle groups versus the changes to the armory?
So I know some of the vehicles have received minor changes. So I believe the P3 out of the gate is slightly better than it was before. I believe it
Yeah,
got
we get
more health.
yeah, it's a bit more health now
Yeah,
of stock, so it's not reliant on the armory to function.
yeah.
Okay.
And there's been a few other minor changes to some of the DAC vehicles, but this is kind of the primary angle. We are adjusting the balance of the DAC vehicles. Again, because these are exclusive, you kind of have to pick a lane
Hmm.
of you want really durable vehicles that can also aid in capturing, vehicles that are a little bit more self-reliant against infantry, or self-dependent. And then you have tungsten rounds, which make them much better against enemy armor. But again, you can't have all of them together. So, for example, if you want really powerful martyrs against like a big mid-game American armored build, you can get the tungsten rounds, but you can no longer have martyrs that have the amount of health they would have before. Or you need to either not get self repair, or you can't have smoke
Mhm.
together. As a few examples.
Okay.
It does create like a bit more decision making on the DAX part, or
Mhm.
away from that previous critical path of just get the best upgrade for that timing, that tier,
Yeah.
and then eventually you'll pick up everything over the course of the game.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on to the next slide?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Battle groups, yes. U.S. Armored Field Repairs adjustment, and just in general,
Yeah,
the
just
armored.
armored in general.
So
That's
you'll
the wrong
see
header.
Armored has been essentially revamped in terms of its tree layout.
So that's the old tree.
Yep, that's the old one,
And
and
then
this is
this
the
is
new
the
one.
new tree.
Yep. So, do you want me to go over the field repairs, or do you want me
But
to
you
go
go
over it?
through the tree first.
So
Yeah.
you'll notice that we've changed the tree up quite a bit for armored. So now, like one year in particular, War Machine now competes with the Easy 8. You can have the option between, do you want cheaper tanks, or do you want the best medium tank in the game? And we have done some additional changes to the Easy 8 to make it that best medium tank, because it now competes with that War Machine passive. But also you'll notice Armored doesn't have as nearly as strong like 0 CP picks. As you can see, Veteran Cruise is now requires 1 CP, which gives us room to buff units like the 4x4
Mhm.
or in the army.
Yeah.
And Field Repairs has also been given a significant change. It not only arrives earlier into the game, or around the same CP, but it does compete with assault engineers, but it has been significantly changed in terms of its function. You can now, rather than being a global repair, you can target individual vehicles with field repairs. There's for a munitions cost, and essentially gives you the best repair in the game when your units are out of combat. And it finally gives Armored some team support as we're allowing you to use field repairs on allies.
Yeah.
Okay. Now some more Africa Core changes.
Yeah, so now we're moving into some battle group adjustments.
Yeah.
Again, we are going through like some of the highlight changes. There are a lot of more faction changes that we haven't done. So a few off immediate memory is like, again, the P3 got some increases to its base health. The what's another example? The 250 had a slight armor reduction as another example. But there's quite a few other miscellaneous changes to all of the other factions that we're gonna kind of skip through to just jump into some of the highlights for the battle group adjustments. So for Africa Corps, Italian infantry also had a reshuffling. A little bit less major than the armor changes, but essentially we've adjusted both the positions of some of the abilities. So you'll notice the defensive positions or the bunker lines have been moved to the left tree, whereas the L640 has been moved to the right tree. So you no longer get the Gustatory and the L640 immediately together. You now must choose which one you opt for. And the other major change is the L640 no longer comes in a pair. The cost has been reduced, and now you get an individual L640 compared to before. Yeah. The other change is to sound the alarm. That as well. But the sound the alarm, it now affects nearby teammates, but we've reduced the bonus that it gives you.
Okay.
So we don't have a specific slide for this, but some of the other minor changes is Panzerjäger received two pretty big changes. As those might know, with the combined arms changes, defensive positions is in a little bit of a different spot. So we've changed the bonus that it gives you.
Yep, so now it'll just be you get combined arms, so as long as your infantry are in connected friendly territory, so it means your infantry still get that speed bonus and ability recharge without needing vehicles to be nearby to provide that bonus. And the biggest change to Panzerjäger Command is you'll no longer be able to drop the butterfly bombs in the fog of war to essentially catch people on their retreat path. So we're just removing that, but butterfly bombs are getting munition cost reduction, so it's easier to just plant minefields in an area in your territory.
Okay. Yep. So we covered those. Let's talk about the British forces and some of the changes to those battle groups.
So the air and sea naval blockade ability has been reworked. Rather than being all neutral points on the map are disabled from being capped, now it is a target ability that prevents a friendly target point from being captured for 30 seconds. So the way the ability works has been reworked quite significantly. The cost has also been adjusted.
Yep. Yeah. So it might seem like a lot, or like, oh, you lock you out for 30 seconds, but it's competing with a very strong pick in that tree, but also you're not going to be able to spam this as there's a significant cooldown on this. But it will be very good for like, I just need a little bit more time before I can get reinforcements up to defend the point, sort of.
Okay. And this is just territory points and not victory points, right?
Yep. It will not be able to be used on victory points.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another major change was the Warcry ability has been reduced from a really massive long duration ability to a much shorter bursty ability with a lower cost. The intent is kind of to make it more of a ability you will use throughout the match more often rather than one really, really big moment. But we've also throttled the amount of times you can use it via increasing the recharge.
And yep, Australian over repair. We've made some adjustments to this one. We slightly reduced the health bonus, but the biggest change we made to it. It will now take significantly longer to do
Apply
the
the
over
vehicles.
repair. So your sappers will need to be spending more time applying over repair, which then obviously means it takes longer to get to the next vehicle and the next vehicle, which you might not have time for depending on how the match is going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we've noticed that with over repair, it's too easy to keep your entire army over repaired at all times. So we are adjusting that so that it's much more of an investment to add the over repair to your units, but also the overall health bonus. I believe it's from 120 was
to
reduced to
100.
100. Yeah.
Okay. What about
Yep.
Wehrmacht?
Yep. So camouflage MGs, we are now moving up by 1 CP because we've made some other changes to make it a little bit more viable for Wehrmacht to go for their MG in the early game.
Mm-hmm.
So with we with those changes, we need to push the camouflage MG back up by 1, but this should also give a bit more room for like heavy gunnery to find its place because
Mm-hmm.
we've been finding in playtest it's not a bad ability. It's actually pretty good for stopping an infantry assault with certain vehicles, but it just has to compete with such a powerful battle group.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know this
ability
was a point of frustration for a lot of players, so I'm glad to see this change as well.
Mm-hmm. The Jericho trumpets in the Terror battle group have been reworked slightly. Rather than just being a area debuff, it is now also a recon ability. So it will reveal the area and camo units within while also applying the debuff that it currently does.
And did I read correctly? Can you cast this in the fog?
Yep, you can
Yes.
cast this on in the Fog of War, and this does mean Axis now have another way to get recon into the Fog of War, especially in those large team games, as Axis doesn't really have a lot of global recon abilities in the
No.
game in comparison to the Allies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another big change is to Breakthrough. The 2.5-ton utility truck has languished a bit, being in a very awkward spot. We kind of left it there because it was more than just like a band-aid to make it good. So now we've made some major adjustments to the way it works.
Yep, so it will still only provide resources to you, but now the resources of the truck is now more based on the resource point rather than the flat amount, so you're more rewarded to bring your truck out to resource points on the map that have more resources, which are obviously generally in more dangerous positions. And there is also another neat thing you can do with the truck now is you can actually put it on a victory point, so it can generate essentially all resource types of essentially medium size. But since victory points are generally in the center of the map, if you do bring that utility truck, it's a high risk, high reward
Mhm.
or sort of gameplay.
Yeah. And to be clear, it'll generate all resource
Mm.
types simultaneously. So it'll generate manpower, munitions, and fuel all together. But again, you have to keep it on a victory point in order to earn those resources. The other change that I think is later in the slides, but we've also made it so that when you cache a strategic point, so the manpower points,
Mhm.
you will get a much increased amount of manpower compared to before. I believe it's plus 20.
Plus 20. Yep.
Yeah. So which is again gives you more options when using this compared to before.
Okay. Some
Oh,
economy
speaking
changes.
of which, there it is.
Oh,
There-
okay.
there you
It was
go.
literally the next slide.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was literally the change I just mentioned. And then we finally have a pretty big change to the way casualties work. Casualty times have been increased very significantly from 30 to 40 seconds to 140 to 150 seconds. So this will affect things mostly the medics, like the American medics
Mhm.
from the triage center, but also abilities like interrogate. So you'll have a much larger window to use the interrogate ability. This also does mean the effective range of a lot of the casualty tents have increased
Mhm.
because
And that's why you see like a reduction in the medic count.
Yeah.
Because now there's more time for medics to get out onto the field, which is also pretty good for large maps now. Before medics could never get out into the large maps to recover casualties. Now they can, but now you're also going to just get less manpower overall on the smaller maps.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so-
I imagine this is sort of in response to the new Polish battle group
Yep,
ability
both
as
to
well.
interrogate
Yeah.
and No Man Left Behind from the
Yeah.
Polish battle group, because where we were finding is you almost never get to use those abilities once. You pretty much have to use it at the end of an engagement.
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, and because you'll never get back to the casualty in time before they fade away.
Yeah. This will also kind of equalize a little bit the value of the casualty mechanics on larger and smaller maps. So on smaller maps, in certain ones, you could get a tremendous amount of manpower from those mechanics, while on larger maps, they would literally do nothing. Now, there will still be a pretty big difference between a long 4v4 map and a very short 1v1 map, but the difference will be much smaller.
And I think that's it for everything that we want to cover in our amazing slide presentation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So what I'll say now is maybe I'll throw it back to you, Jason and Darren. Any sort of before, because we also have some questions that we polled players to submit earlier, so we can maybe get to a few of those because we still have some time. But before we do that, is there any sort of bow that you want to tie on the presentation that we just gave, and any sort of final thoughts about what we just covered here?
So there are other changes. I just saw in chat,
Yeah,
Whizbang was
yeah,
changed.
Whizbang has a change, but
I mean, yeah, it's a little weird because we can't release the full patch notes just this moment, but there's quite a few other miscellaneous changes. So there's going to be more to the patch than what we covered. However, the things that like the reason why we wanted to cover the changes we did is kind of two major targets we had for this patch was one, making the early game mainline gameplay more interesting. Making it so that you could use riflemen, just more in general, but also improvements to like the DAC infantry and also to the grenadiers as well. The other main change again is to make it so that, especially in team games, large amounts of medium armor will be more effective against each other, but also be less effective against infantry. And we're hoping to see heavy tanks come kind of back into the team game meta. We've definitely seen both the stats and people like feedback of like, hey, heavy tanks presence in large team games is lower than what we prefer and what a lot of people prefer, while also reducing it in 1v1. So there's quite a few major meta shifts changes. We're hoping all of these changes make the game more fun and also change meaningfully the builds that people have been going for.
Okay. So let's get to folks. If you do have questions, please throw them in the chat, and we'll grab some of those as we go along. But I do have some from earlier when we put out this post earlier this week. So let's run through a couple of those. I'll actually start with this one from Hobo Fingers, one of our moderators on the Discord. They ask, what do you think is the most unexpected or maybe surprisingly difficult part of balancing? What is potentially an element that seems easy enough or simple to players, but maybe isn't? So maybe let's start there in terms of like, what's an aspect of the job that may be a little bit more difficult once you kind of dig into it than it appears on the surface.
in particular for Company of Heroes, I find it's trying to get like, just increase this unit slightly, just take this unit slightly down. It's a bit harder in our game because we just have a much smaller unit count overall, so all units are in general just more impactful to have. But also when you lose them, the loss is much more impactful. So trying to like increase something's damage or like output is not particularly easy because like for vehicle on vehicle combat, getting like an additional shot to kill on someone or taking one more shot, one last shot is massive, while infantry it's not as straightforward because entities get killed and that also reduces your firepower. But obviously a 5% accuracy increase is not like going to be immediately evident compared to, let's say, giving your a large mass of units from another game +1 damage, sort of thing.
Okay. Jason, any thoughts for that question, or is that kind of it?
I have plenty, but like I feel like I've worked in this space for so long that I'm losing what is unexpected and what isn't at this point. I mean, a few interesting things is like there are a lot of times where the community is just way faster than us at like finding certain things. But we've also noted there have been times where we've identified something as really strong, but no one really uses it for a long period of time.
Oh yeah,
And
there's
then
that.
just weirdly at the randomest of times, like midway into a patch, people discover that it's really good, and then like it catches us off guard at times because usually they find a way to make it better than we think it is, and then yeah. But like sometimes these things can lay dormant for like a few patches, and then all of a sudden they kind of erupt.
Yeah. I did see a question in the chat. I forget who asked it, but basically someone was asking about the Canadian heal aura. And I know we did fix that, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I don't have the patch notes in front of me, but from my understanding, like it still applies the buff, but the Canadian player needs to be nearby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, that should be fixed in the upcoming 2.2, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. Next up, a question from Burn for me, please. They ask, can you speak to the reasoning for Decapitation Strike having 3 uses in a time window after activation as opposed to just 3 uses on a cooldown.
No, as in three separate. So decapitation strike, at least the core of it, we want it to be a big ability that you essentially have to use up within quick succession. It's not something you should be able to hold on for like you hold these charges and then you'll carry that into the next, or be able to like just keep using decapitation strike. Like if they each was like 60 with a cooldown of like 30 seconds between each other.
Hmm.
If that's what I'm trying to understand, we want you to use something like decapitation strike from the Polish. Like, you have a bit of time to redirect those strikes, but you need to use all those strikes within this time frame,
Hmm.
because that is core to the ability.
Okay. I saw another question about the Canadian Pyro debuff, and I think we fixed that as well.
Yep, the stacking should be gone now
Yep.
in the upcoming patch.
Question from Liechtenstein via Discord. This is a very long one. Basically, they ask about like what is the intent behind the role and the timing for the Polish Lancers, just because they seem
Ah.
very costly. They have 2 AT
So-
rifles. So what's sort of the design intent with that unit?
So their role is actually not anti-vehicle. They are an anti-light unit. They are fragile, but they put out a lot of firepower for what they are.
Hmm.
One, if they're fighting veteran units, they get additional damage, so that helps them catch back up at their timing. But their AT rifles are not like the standard Tommy boys. Like, you're getting a Bren gun with them, a standard Bren, but you're also getting essentially 2 supercharged boys anti-tank rifles, which are just better against light vehicles in general.
Hmm.
And they will also be pretty dangerous to infantry. So this means the Lancer squad can deal with most of the threats if you get them early for their timing, which is infantry, light vehicles. And if they're fighting from good cover, they're not going to win against the medium tank, but they are going to be able to put some damage onto it.
Yeah.
Over time, especially if they can get side or rear hits.
Yeah, they're going to be threatening enough where if you use any of the other Polish weapons like the tulips or the firefly, you can use them in conjunction with those tools to deal with things like heavy or medium armor as well. So they're going to be quite effective against. They're going to pose a pretty difficult problem to a lot of builds, where it's essentially like you need to counter me, but then a lot of those counters the Polish have answers to as well. So they should be overall quite strong.
And you're not, while they do have that high manpower cost associated with them, you're getting all those weapons without needing to pay the munition costs. And Brits generally have a lot of things fighting for munitions in their army.
Okay. Another question here from Tevery Best on Discord. They ask, it's been a while since the grenade rebalance. Any
Mhm.
thoughts on how that worked out?
I mean, overall, I think they've gone pretty well. I think it's still very much ongoing. So, like, for example, the grenade changes to the grenadiers kind of is an extension of these changes. We've noted things like the rifle grenade has been quite good, and we're still looking at, like, is it quite in the right space? But in terms of the overall grenades, I think we're much happier with them than they were before. Yeah.
Okay. Another one, and probably an easy one, because I think I know the answer to this one already. Village Bus asks, is there a possibility that new units will be added to the existing rosters,
Yeah.
like the base rosters for the factions?
Generally, very unlikely. One of our main goals is to keep build and unit diversity in the factions as well. So we want to make it like if we were to add really cool new units, they'd probably be to battle groups and content like that. We also want to make sure the core factions always have some degree of what's it called? Not like they need to have certain gaps that kind of define what they're really good at and also what they're somewhat weak at. And these gaps can then interact with how other builds work. We don't want every build or every faction to be completely insulated to every kind of threat that can come their way, or else they become a little too a little flat, but also b it becomes a balance issue in and of itself.
Okay.
And there's also just adding a new unit. You have to figure out where that unit is going to fit into the roster, especially if they have overlap with other units
Yep.
in that roster. And would that mean if you add that unit, does this unit just kind of, not see play anymore because the other one has essentially replaced it in a role?
Okay. Question from Twitch chat here. Someone was asking a follow-up question on the changes to U.S. Armored.
Mhm.
So they ask if there are any changes to the Scott or the repair vehicle, since they're both now much lower in the tech tree than they originally were.
So none for the repair vehicle. We have a minor adjustment for the Scott, but we do have that unit on our radar for the future.
Hmm. The also, I think the value of all of the salvage mechanics or units have slowly gone up over time. So in some ways, this was an intended reduction in the strength of the repair vehicle, though I don't think it was that common for people to get it at the 1 CP timing regardless.
Hmm.
But yes.
It's still a very strong vehicle because of that, as Jason mentioned. As people are finding, you can, bring back tanks to life, or
Mhm.
essentially it powers your economy.
I saw a question mentioning like did the cost reductions affect the Panther? The answer is no. So for those changes are specifically to the generalist heavy tanks. So I believe the list was the King Tiger, the Tiger Colin,
Hmm.
the Pershing,
Pershing and Black
the
Prince.
Black
So,
Prince.
but
Yeah,
but the Elephant and Crocodile are not affected because those are
yeah,
more specialist vehicles. They have more clear counters to them when they do arrive. So
hmm,
where the generalists, like, they can deal with both infantry and tanks.
yeah.
Things very cost effectively.
Okay. So a couple questions asking if there's any changes to the espionage battle group.
Uh,
I don't
I
think
don't
so, right?
believe
Like I think it's
at
mostly.
this.
we're working on them, which
It's
is why I'm thinking about it. That battle group is very much on the radar. We know it has some major issues to it, so there are definitely changes in the pipe for it. But I believe 2-2 doesn't have to
not
any of
none for espionage because our main focus, as you could see in this patch for DAC, was like their core
yeah.
faction and of both their early game combined arms synergy and their armory changes.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question here from I think this is also from Hobo Fingers. They were asking about um, sort of power spikes and call-ins with either in 1v1s or actually across most game modes. They ask, what is the overall vision for how mid-game vehicle call-ins should fit into the flow of the match, and do you have any
Mhm.
plans to look at their roles, um, considering that we just made some of those changes that we did in this update.
Yeah. So this is a pretty big topic, but kind of like
I
one
feel
of
like
the
we have to
new
address it every time.
one of the new things to this conversation is kind of the way we're handling heavy tanks is somewhat of an experiment to see if we could make these vehicles essentially have this 2-lane premium. So in the past, we essentially separated the call-in and the production unlock into different things. We've also removed some of the call-ins and just made them production unlocks. This is kind of a third lane of essentially making a dual channel of, hey, it is a call-in, but it is discounted by going for tech. I think that is probably something we will consider for more call-ins as we continue the balance work on the game. We will see how this change lands. So that's probably the newest change to this conversation is seeing if those are going to work. We experimented actually with it internally at a certain point, but like changing every call in the game was just like too massive a change, even for a major patch. So we've done it specifically to the heavy tanks, but there is a world where that continues. But in terms of overall vision, I don't think that has changed too much. The intent is that they can change your mid game builds in meaningful ways, but we're still not okay with them essentially becoming the end all of your mid game builds. So like a lot of the builds where you just spam out that vehicle and that vehicle only, we're okay with it as long as there are really meaningful trade offs to those kind of
And there
strats.
needs to be counterplay, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
because so it's like we're more like we're also fine if like you can get certain mid game vehicles if they're like specialists,
Hmm.
and they have clear counters from the other factions to deal
Yeah.
with that sort of unit.
Okay. There's a couple questions in the chat that I could
Hmm.
probably answer. Someone was asking about potentially adding cosmetics for battle group units. And I know that's something that we've kind of kicked around internally. There are several challenges that come with that that we would have to sort of figure out good solutions to. And to be frank, it gets messy very quickly. Like as an example, like would you bundle them all together? But what happens if you don't own one of the battle groups that you're purchasing cosmetics for? Would they be offered individually? So there's a lot of stuff that we'd have to figure out. And The other thing is about like where we focus the time of our artists and tech people. Um, Main faction rosters make the most sense because those are the units that you're going to see every single match, and they're easier to bundle. They're guaranteed to sort of be available for every player. So there's a lot to talk through and work out there. But Yeah, so no plans right now, but it's something that we're kind of keeping in the back of our head. I saw another question about the redacted secret thing that was on the roadmap that was pushed to 2026. And if we can talk about that. And that's what secrets are, things you can't talk about. So
It's still
hopefully
redacted.
more news on that in 2026, hopefully. Um,
Oh, sound effects.
yeah,
Yeah.
those were it for a lot of the questions that I had saved beforehand. So we can give this another minute or two to see if there's any additional questions in the chat. Um, any air support center changes?
No air support changes at the moment, though we have been looking at
A
air overall.
Yeah,
Just not an easy system to figure out in
yeah.
particular.
We did actually intend at one point to do major AA changes this patch, but it was too major to do with all of the other changes alongside, so that has been postponed.
Okay. Um, were there any sound effects changes? Yes,
Yep.
actually. We have a new sound person on the team, and they've actually got some fun ones that are in this update. You may have heard some of them in some of the shoutcasts and videos already. Um, Jason or Darren, do you have a new favorite sound effect that is now in the game?
Well, my favorite is probably what is it? Our I guess medium variant of the 75 mil that we have. So the big thunk brings back that's found on the Pack 40 and the Panzer 4.
Okay. What about you, Jason?
There is a new sound effect that affects one of the units we covered in this conversation that I don't believe made it into any of the content that's gone out.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't ruin what it is. People will notice pretty quickly once they play the patch, but that one's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Let me see. Any other questions? Any other questions?
I guess if their bazooka team doesn't count as a team weapon, it's mainly because the bazooka team's not a team weapon. It's an infantry squad. So when we consider like an upgrade affects all team weapons, it will only affect all team weapons and not like have like this exception for the most part of like
Because the bazooka team doesn't truly set up. It has bonus for being stationary, but it's a bit different. Yeah, what else?
will the Chaffee's recon build be similar to the Stuart? We've gone over that one. No, they're not the same.
Does the OSS coordination from the new Italian partisan battle group reduce the cooldown triggered on using the tunnels?
Right now, no. We experimented with that and we've considered that, but right now, no, it does not.
Okay, cool. I think we'll probably start wrapping things up here. Any final thoughts on some of the discussion here, Jason,
Yeah.
Darren, before we end things?
Again, as a disclaimer, there are other changes in the patch. But I think we've shared our thoughts in terms of the direction we want to go. We're kind of readjusting both vehicle and infantry gameplay to center around a little bit more micro than it was before. So again,
Mhm.
tactics like flanking, cover, things like that. We are going to be looking at doubling down on this in the future. So this is kind of the overall direction we're going, where we want to make unit tactics a little bit more important than they are right now. We've noted in kind of the last few patches, your build order really defines the game. So things like your shock unit timings and the other things. And we're slowly chipping away at this. For example, the rifleman changes that we did are intended to kind of clear the way so that these things are just more important, for example. But there's going to be more work kind of going
Mhm.
on. But yeah, we're very excited to see how people will play with these new changes.
Okay. What about you, Darren?
Yeah, just mainly excited to get these out into the wild. Like these might not seem like a ton of changes overall, but of how they've affected the game and have kind of completely changed how certain factions play in particular. Cough USF just plays completely different now with just a few of those essentially numerical changes and not like you know, change giving you a new tech sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'm pretty excited for a lot of the changes that are going to be coming in the 2.2 Scarlet Bison update. I just kind of finished my review of the patch notes and got those ready. So there's a lot of exciting stuff in there that we haven't discussed here. But I think that's going to have to do it for today. You're going to have to wait for Thursday. Of course, as always, if you want to stay up to date on everything else Company of Heroes, be sure to follow us on your channel of choice: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Twitch at Company of Heroes. Or you can jump into the Discord server and chat with the team and the community team, other amazing players. Just head to discord.gg/relic entertainment. And like I was mentioning, the patch notes, those will be going up the morning of November 27th on Steam. So keep an eye out for those. And of course, that same day, our new battle groups in the Endure and Defy DLC pack will be available on the Steam store. So you're not going to want to miss those. I think that's it. So thanks everyone for watching. Enjoy the update, and we will see you next time.